cue that up.
I was playing around with you.
We can talk. Hello, welcome to Monday. Have a great day, have a great day.
Bless you, President Washington. Don't chop down a cherry tree while you're at it.
All right, coming on in. You're getting some papers handed back to you. And in a second, I'm going to make sure everybody has. Who wants volunteers up there? One everybody. Welcome, come on in. Welcome to Monday. It's a great day to have a great day. And we're gonna all right, as we're settling in, here's a warm-up question for today. And this should be the 5th of your warm-ups on this page right here. So you should be in spot number 5. Here's a warm-up question. So write the question, answer the couple of categories there. We'll talk about it here in just a second. Hello, welcome to Monday. You may call me Mr. President. Take it. And make sure push-ups or anything. That's good. What do you have? We'll turn that in after this one. That's right. That's right. All right, it's time. You to my class, they to their class.
Where's the team at? I'll shoot the security.
You ever heard of Ruby Ridge? I have heard of it. It's deep, isn't it? Links to other things too. Oh, we'll barely see you. All right, coming on in. You have a warm-up prompt. This is number 5. Take out that gray parchment paper. If you're on number 5, I will be taking it up after this. Here's this question for today. Go ahead and think through it. We will talk about it, of course. Hello. Get there. I'm just so pleased that we're not strangers anymore. We know each other. Mr. Swanson's out today. We go to the dentist. I think so, Mr. President will be appropriate for today. How may I help you? Love this song. One of my favorites.
Please stand for pledge allegiance and a moment of silence.
Pick a flag, any flag. I love this room.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence. Everyone have a great day.
Okay, first block, Mr. Swanson's classroom. As you can see, he's not here again today. I believe he told me dentist, which I feel like the dentist in this day is far advanced from the dentist in my day. Didn't really have to put a filling in those wood dentures, you know what I mean? But I'm pleased that we have made each other's acquaintance before. We're not strangers in the same way. In fact, Mr. Swanson and I talked after our last substitutionary period, and because it seems that you're just on track with, well, some experiences that I've had, he actually requested that I be his substitute again. So whereas last time it was a surprise to me that you were telling the story of the Revolution, this time I'm more prepared to talk about my experiences as the first chief executive of the United States. So it will be appropriate to refer to me as Mr. President. Simple enough, right? We'll just go with Mr. President, and that will do for now. So I'm pleased to be in the classroom again. You do have a warm-up here, and it appears it says, who do you trust to give you advice? And I would like you to name them. It may be as simple as my mother, my father, and if it's another name, I see the hand, I'll get you in a second. Name them, give them a title, and this is why they're an expert in your life or why you trust them. So director of or mentor to, whatever a title may work for you. And then you got to tell me why. Why do they hold that position in your life? And do you still have a question, or did I answer it?
Oh, you answered. I was going to see if it was like a for the past or something.
Perfect. Yeah. I would like it to be someone true to your life. Like, who do you really actually trust to give you advice in your life? If it is someone like a famous pastor, maybe I would understand. Maybe that person fits in your life as well. Yeah, so there's your question. Now, a little bit of admin. We handed back papers from the past week. File those where they go, be it notes or vocab or activities. Study Guide Scavenger Hunt has its own category in your folders. And you have received 2 pages for today. And we know that pages generally last all week. So these are fill-in-the-blank notes, more than 1 day's worth. This is open-ended vocab, more than 1 day's worth. Yeah, we're leveling up a little bit. You got 2 ongoing documents now, so I will alert you as to the key blanks. But this is going to be things to have on your desk all week long. They are ongoing notes and vocab for the whole week. We are rolling into week 4, and Mr. Swanson just knows that you can level up with the rigor as well. So I'll give you about one more minute to finish that up, and then we'll talk about it. play the song of my people. I didn't get to enjoy this song in my day. As a time traveler in 2022, I really like this song. Bonus points, or maybe it's brown nose points, I don't know, make me like you better. Anybody know what song that was?
Sounds like a grand entrance.
Sounds like a grand entrance is spot on. Title of the song, anybody? It's called Hail to the Chief, and it is played whenever the president enters any room. Now, I made a joke that I would not have heard that in my day. That is true because it was not written until the fourth president, which we will speak of this week. So Hail to the Chief. To this day, that song gets played whenever the president enters the room. All right, let me hear from some of y'all. Who do you trust to give you advice? I can bring out the talking Olaf if we need to. Your grandma, okay? So that is her name. That is her. You want to share grandma's name? Joanna. Okay. What title does she get to hold in your life? Your what? I can't hear you. I got you. Your mentor. Okay. In a variety of things. Okay. My mentor. And why? She said she's been through a lot of things that you haven't experienced in your young life, and she knows more than you could know across 15 years so far. Okay, I like that. We got a grandma on the board. Somebody else? I need 3 at least. Please.
I put my sister.
Sister's name?
Lily.
Lily. Okay, we're going to give credit to Lily. What position does Lily hold in your life? What title would she hold?
Probably a role model.
Role model. She's my role model. Okay, and what?
Because she's like honest, trustworthy, and loyal.
Honest, trustworthy, and loyal. 3 key attributes. So you feel like she can level your morality game, perhaps, based on her own character. I like that. All right, we're giving credit to Lily. How old is Lily?
She's 21.
Okay, so a hair older than you. Okay, a couple years older than you. Been through a couple more things. I like that. Need at least one more. I'm going to share you my example, as I always do. I need at least one more from you.
Trust no man.
Delaney has spoken. Delaney, who do you trust to give you advice?
Trust no man.
No one. Ooh, Delaney is an island of one. You know what? I'll hear that. If that's your response, I'll hear that because it's your response and I can't tell you who to trust. Okay, that's an alternate perspective. Need one more. I feel like Jackson's ready to do it. Jackson's trying to not talk, but I'm going to give him permission to.
Well, parents always found they have the best interests at heart. They
Okay.
become very wise.
Parents, now what title would you really give them?
I'd say mentors.
Mentors. Okay, mentors in life, and for the reason they raised you, they got an invested interest in you and seeing you soar to new heights, etc. Okay, good. Here's my example. You guys went with those super close relationships. Here's my example. I trust this is Mr. Swanson's answer. My battalion commander in the Army, my National Guard boss. So just like in this building, I would have Mr. Powell, Miss Williams, right there, administration. My battalion commander is my Army boss. I trust him. I give him the title of Military Affairs Advisor. A major corner of my life is my career in the Army, right, Mr. Swanson's. So I would trust my battalion commander as my Military Affairs Advisor, and here's my why. Echoing similar to many things you said, he has more years of experience than me. He's experienced ranks I haven't. He's been on deployments different than my own. So I trust him to advise me in certain ways, and therefore I give him that position of trust in my life. So keep this parchment paper for just one more half class. I am going to collect at the end of class, but hang on to the writing here because we're going to talk about how this is relevant, as we always do in the middle of class here in just a second. So, keeping that here we are going to kick off with, I love a good, are you ready for it? What? It's the Dance American Revolution. Everybody give me a dab it up now. We've just fought a war. We have danced the American Revolution, and now it is time to talk about, I feel like my brain's about to explode, the presidencies of Washington and Adams. So we do not transition there. We're now going to talk about the presidencies, the American presidency, and of course we are going to start with the presidencies of first two presidents. We are not going to memorize the presidents in order. Part of me really wants to have a check off on you reciting all 46 presidents. I think that's a great skill to have, a great thing to have memorized. There's some cutesy songs out there that can help you get there. But we can at least memorize the first five. And by the time we've talked about them very deliberately this week, you're going to have the first five locked down. So we are in a new unit, Unit 2. Unit 2 goes, we call it first five presidents, all the way to Reconstruction. And that means we fight the Civil War in the middle of it. That's a long chunk of information. In this classroom, we're going to cut that in half. We're going to call it Unit 2A. It's going to go from the first five presidents to the beginning of the Civil War. We're going to walk ourselves up to the Civil War. We'll have a benchmark exam then, and it is September 8th, if I remember correctly. I'll put that on my board. Unit 2B is going to be the road to the Civil War. Okay, we actually fight the war through Reconstruction. So, granted, in the grand scheme of things, you got to approach the EOC exam with everything in your brain. But as we're learning it, we're going to chunk it a little bit, 2A, 2B, and we think that Mr. Mosley and Mr. Swanson have collaborated. We think that that'll help students understand along the way just a little bit better. So today we're diving into this new experiment, the presidency. So you gotta remember, having come through the American Dance Revolution, we have created the United States of America, this bold new invention and experiment. Very often we are still in what is called the American experiment. Big risk. These founding fathers, framers of the Constitution, took a big, bold risk, 8 years fighting for independence, and now it's like, what are we going to produce? Well, we produce a democracy. In a world ruled by kings and monarchs, this democracy was very unique and just like this brave new adventure that we decided to embark upon. Part of the experiment was 3 distinctly different branches of government. Can you tell me what they are? Delano in the back. Yeah.
Judicial,
Okay.
legislature.
That's true. Now she said them slightly out of order, at least in terms of how I memorize them. How do I memorize them? I like ledge, L-E-J, because legislative kicks it off, executive and judicial. Delano, good job, you hit all 3 of them. But if you're someone that likes mnemonics like me, L-E and J, legislative, executive, and judicial. And in this chunk of class, we are going to focus on the executive, the office of the president. A lot of people will say that the office of the president embodies the hopes and aspirations of the American people. It's a position invested with power, is one man, a figurehead to represent us all. And across the time and history of the United States presidency, we've had some very unique, different individuals and personalities hold that office. So there's no one type of person that is most suited to be the president. The office of the president in its early stages was very open for interpretation. It was in a world of monarchs and kings. This better be good. Just kidding, what's up?
I need you.
Which one? Eric. There you go.
Sorry to disrupt.
You're fine. I'm gonna leave it cracked. You just come on in. Very different than the wider European world, the world that these explorers once left, old world and new world. Kings, monarchs, royal bloodline. That was the currency of leadership of the day. So to have this position where someone is selected or elected to the position, that was very novel. Right. And at the end of the revolution, this is a very unique time frame for us to experiment in this fashion. So it's not like we haven't been busy. It's not like we haven't been having a whole lot going on in this new world, and we're going to throw on top of it this grand American experiment and of this position of the executive branch of government headed by one man. You got to think. We talked about it a lot. We talked about the characteristics of the colonies. These 13 colonies could have easily been 13 unique countries. They could have been in agreement with each other, but distinctly different from each other. Could have been 13 different countries. So the radical experiment is being united under one constitution. But there's plenty of questions to be answered. How much power should one man have? How much power should this particular branch have? What is the check to that power? The whole revolution was to break away from what? One powerful man. Yeah, King George. So you can understand the framers were very hesitant to give a president a lot of power. And that is why we have checks to power with the legislature and the judicial branch. And in fact, a lot of people really believe that the president was just supposed to be kind of the yes man to Congress. Congress would legislate. The president would just simply do what they put on his desk. That was the original belief, what should be the role of the president. And then we also have the big question of how to choose this person in the first place. Are the people going to be educated enough, the commoners, to cast a vote in these very complex, amidst very complex political issues? Can a farmer from South Carolina really cast a vote for the leader of this new country? Or do we cast a vote for representatives who then elects the president? We're going to talk about that a little bit. This is the forerunner of the beginning of the Electoral College, where states have a proportional balance of votes called electors, and the slate of electors actually votes for the president on behalf of the people. And then, super important, who should be first? At the Constitutional Convention, this was a question that set out to perhaps doom this new constitutional republic before it even started, if not for one man willing to step up, raise his hand, throw his hat into the ring at the beginning of this grand experiment. And that man was none other than the man standing before you here today, George Washington. Now we have to remember where George Washington came from. Who was he? What was he? He'd been the leader of the Continental Army. That's right. Many men in the room had just served and under him, fought for him in the grand revolution, the glorious revolution that we'd all just come through in the first place. So there was one key man who could possibly make this all work as the first person, and that it was decided, I say this humbly, none other than yours truly, George Washington was the man selected, the man easily, as a front runner, an easy front runner to be the first person. And here's why people had confidence that George Washington would be the first best candidate for this position. Already walked away from power. They wanted to king me. They wanted to crown me after the revolution. They said, you are the leader of us. Be our monarch. Remember, it's really hard to walk away from something that you're used to. And I said, no, I'm not going to be that. We didn't fight this war to crown a king. I won't be your forever leader. But under this constitutional convention, I did agree to be the first president. And we're going to look at that election here in just a second. So pick up on your notes here, your guided notes. Let's think about America in 1790, right? At the time of the ratification of the Constitution, end of the war, into the Constitutional Convention, and all these events happening at once. So predominantly a rural society. For all the talk about big cities and port cities, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, there's really only a couple of large cities, those cities I just named. We were a predominantly rural society. About 80% of households in this new America were involved in agricultural production of some sort. What you got? Missing some right here. Anybody else? Two sets of notes for the week. 80% of households involved in agricultural production. So you can see that this is the lion's share of Americans involved in agriculture, not industry. There's about 3 million Americans total. I'll give you perspective. Today, where we sit in 2022, there's 330 million Americans. So do the math. I mean, a major percentage growth in our 246 years. 3 million Americans total. 750,000 of them about African Americans. So that's about 20% of the total population, like just under a quarter of the total population. And most of those African Americans live in the South. There are about 10% free non-whites, that's how I'm going to say it, free non-whites living in the North. So super minority in the North, and then those who did live in the South were in bondage and, you know, in the institution of slavery. So this is the makeup of America at the time. Building a new government. So Congress convenes on March 4th, 1789 to vote for a new president. As I said, I threw my name into the hat, and on the first ballot, Washington won the unanimous 69 electoral votes. It was 69-0. There was no one else even there. And the system at the time was that the first place vote getter would be president, and the second place vote getter would be vice president. Well, in this first election, there was no second candidate for starters. So Washington sweeps all 69 electoral votes. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I will be your first president. And then on the second ballot, this is where there were more candidates, but the winner of the second ballot was John Adams. So John Adams becomes the vice president. This is the beginning of some rivalries. Thomas Jefferson was on that second ballot as well, but the winner was John Adams with 34 electoral votes. He becomes the vice president. So there we have it. We have our first chief executive set up, George Washington, president, John Adams, vice president. And then just kind of note, I like to point out the timeline. The Bill of Rights wasn't adopted until 1791. Constitution passed, president elected. Amidst all this, there is still negotiation for this Bill of Rights, this protection of individual liberties, ratified by states in 1791. Of note, I took office on April 30th, 1789 in, anybody know what city? You want to say, yeah, but I'm Washington and the city hadn't even been built yet. New York City. Capital of the country at this time was New York City. That's because there's going to be some negotiation for the location of a permanent capital city. Tell you about that here in just a second. But I took office in New York City. And in fact, I will never reside in what will become known as Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, the federal district. I will never reside there. It's going to be John Adams, who's the first to reside in the White House. Hand or a stretch? Just a real good stretch. Okay. So I want you to also imagine this, right? This is, without patting myself on the back, this is the level of service I was willing to bring to the country. I had to pay for my own inauguration. I had to pay for my own travel to the Capitol. And by pay for it, I mean, I had to take out a loan. I had to take out a personal loan from a bank in order to be president. Not only was I serving my people, not only was I willing to do the difficult, the years of difficulty that would come with that, okay? I'm convinced that I died younger than I could have lived if I was just on the farm relaxing. But not only at the expense of my health, at the expense of my sanity, but literally at the expense of my bank account, did I choose to be the first president of the United States. I had to borrow money from a banker in order to attend my own inauguration. So a little bit more about me here, right? Mr. Swanson routinely jokes that questions on our exams are never as simple as who was the first president of the United States? George Washington, right? That is a fact that we all just have to know. And from that knowledge, we start to have larger questions on our exams. I know you just came through an exam, and we'll talk about it here at the end of our class here. But you can write this down. George Washington, first president, elected twice, 1789 and again in 1792. So that means that I served 2 terms, and we'll talk about that. It's pretty significant. Faced several challenges in the presidency, established several precedents in my presidency. We're going to talk about challenges and precedents as my watch just went off. We come back from our bathroom break. So kicked it off with the Dance Dance Revolution. We've done a little bit of journaling. We're into our notes just a little bit. Check it out and get the wiggles out. And come on back. We're going to finish up with challenges and precedents. There I am.
Yes.
What do you know? All right, challenges and then precedents. So you can see on your vocab page, there's a big category for challenges, a big category for precedents, and that is where we're about to go, challenges and precedents.
Vámonos.
Spanish existed in your
Challenges, well, of course it did. Spanish existed far before English. Challenges and precedents on your page. There's a category for each of them. I'll also point out we are about to talk about one of my favorite young men, Challenge OEB. About to talk about Alexander Hamilton, and he's on the back of the first page there. So just as we turn to Alexander Hamilton, you're going to want to be there. So challenges. We're going to talk briefly about each of these. This is just kind of the upfront. The nation was deep in debt. Debt means what? Yeah, you owe money. Who's in debt right now to someone else? $1, $10, more than $10. Yeah, some of you might be in debt to the cafeteria. If you got a bill on your cafeteria, like you got to pay back that money. Debt. I'll point this out. A lot of y'all in your writing on your so you guys scavenger hunt put DEPT. It is not that. It is DEBT. So just teach you a little along the way how to spell debt. The value of our currency was very low. It was overprinted. We still struggled with state currencies, and we didn't really have a national currency. So how we even hold money in our hands, that's its own problem. So to raise money, the national government decides to put a tax on whiskey. We're going to talk about that. And taxes on imports, that's tariffs. The design there was to make American goods cheaper and foreign goods more expensive. However, in the end, that makes goods more expensive. You know, every now and then we want some imports. Makes goods more expensive. All of these lead to the so-called Whiskey Rebellion. And a rebel against something, it might as well be whiskey, right? No, the Whiskey Rebellion. So these are challenges, and we are going to talk about each of them along the way. I still see some writing going on. So if you're writing under challenges, that's fine. The next place you might want to turn to is Alexander Hamilton. It's on your page here. It says parentheses, not a president, because he wasn't. But Alexander Hamilton, you're going to write about him here in just a second. He's on your open-ended vocab and on your notes. So I understand you're balancing between 2 pages, right? We're increasing the rigor this week. You're going to fill in the blank notes, but I also want you to summarize in your own words what is Alexander Hamilton known for. All right, just getting you ready for where we're going. I think I see most writing is complete. I'm going to move on. Alexander Hamilton. How do you know this young man today? Huh? $10. The $10 bill. Yes, his face is on the $10 bill. Excellent. How else? The Broadway musical is what I expected to hear. You caught me off guard there. Yeah, so the musical called Hamilton is based on the life of Alexander Hamilton. And I will just give you my George Washington be careful speech here. Not everything in the musical is true to history. Catchy though it may be, not everything in the musical is truly true to history. So watch it with a discerning eye. It is a wonderful piece of Broadway magic, just not entirely true to history. Alexander Hamilton. So he was a Federalist, and he's going to participate in government as being the first Secretary of the Treasury in my cabinet. We will talk about my cabinet here in just a second at length. But he is one of those advisors, just as your opening question was about who do you trust to give you advice. He was one of my advisors in my cabinet. Alexander Hamilton, he got a big opinion on money and how to use money in the early government. He said that the war debt should be a national responsibility, and all 13 states should bear the same portion of paying back their debts. Responsibility being paid by all states since all benefited. Now, here's the catch. Southern states had largely already paid off their debts, and it was northern states who were still carrying a debt. So southern states didn't super appreciate this statement because, hey, we already did what we were supposed to. Our accounts are balanced. Northern states, on the other hand, say, yeah, let's create a national bank to carry all of our debts. So he called for a national assumption of states' debts. He said this would build a sense of an American nationalism. If we're all in this together, we're all going to share in the debt, just like we shared in the war. This should increase nationalism in our country. The other side of it is, if you are, think about this, if we're taking loans from other countries to pay back our debts, that's what a national bank could do. That would make those other countries want to make sure we continue to exist. If we're going to take a loan from France, if we're going to take a loan from Spain, who's been our friend so far, those two countries, they're not going to want us to disappear. Any of you owed money by somebody right now? Somebody owes you $10 from the Coke machine. Coleman, you're owed some money. Delano, you're owed some money. Coleman, who owes you money? Your dad owes you money. Are you pretty interested in making sure your dad sticks around and gives you some money? Yeah, right. So let's just say it's friendships, right? You gave someone $3 on the bus, whatever. You want that friend. You don't want that friend to move to Jacksonville. You don't want that friend to ghost you. You're interested in that friend sticking around until he pays you back. Same thing here. We're going to take loans from other countries to pay back our war debt, and we really want those countries are going to want us to stick around to make sure that we can pay back what we borrowed from them in the first place. So this is Alexander Hamilton's big why he wants to create, or he wants all of us to share in the war debt and create something called the National Bank. Now here's the controversy, kind of already said it. Most debt was held by Northerners, and sharing it didn't seem very fair to the South. So he's got this call for sharing in debt. How are we going to do that? He wants to create what is called a national bank. If we have a national bank, now we have many banks in and around town. One of them is called First National Bank. That is not the same as saying it is the national bank. There's also a brand of banks called Bank of America. That is not saying it's the bank for all of America. Those are just names for private banks today. This was truly a national bank, a bank that was going to be in charge of all American currency, and all banking would start with and end with the national bank. We don't have one today. So I understand you guys might try, it might be hard to understand because we don't have one today. But at the time, here's what the national bank would do. It would print a national currency. It finally put us all on the same page with money. A big reason, legacy of Alexander Hamilton, is that he is on the $10 bill. It's because he's the creator of this national bank, and he created a national currency. Having this national bank would grow capital in the economy, and that is very similar to what I said. If we are in debt to others, if we have taken out a loan from another country, they're going to be interested in us surviving. So I've already made that point. And then he says that there is the closing of the Constitution, and Article 1 of the Constitution says that anything not explicitly written down in this piece of paper, but is necessary and proper for the running of the government, can be created. He says national bank may not be written down in the Constitution, but it is necessary and proper for us to run our country, so therefore we can create it. The other side of all of this, so Alexander Hamilton is a Federalist. I've told you, Federalist is a party. Federalist is one side of thought in the country right now. What is the other side, the counter or the opponents to Federalists? And you know them as anti-Federalists. Who is their leader? None other than Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is going to have a pretty alternate opinion on the national bank. Now, what you know as anti-Federalists is going to become Democratic Republicans. Okay, so at the time, I think I made the joke last week that if the ever so creatively named anti-Federalists, right? If you're not a Federalist, you're an anti-Federalist. They're going to rebrand as Democratic Republicans. So now and into the future, Thomas Jefferson and his party is going to be known as the Democratic Republicans. Jefferson says that you, in fact, can't create a bank because it's not written in the Constitution. He is a strict interpreter of the Constitution. If it's not written down, you can't do it. That is one school of thought. One school of thought is Hamilton's, hey, anything that's necessary and proper, we can do. The other school of thought is, hey, if it's not written in the Constitution, you cannot do it. So Jefferson's going to oppose the national bank on that ground, saying it's not written into the Constitution. Jefferson and James Madison and other former anti-federalists who are becoming Democratic Republicans, they're going to say that having this bank is unconstitutional for all those reasons. It goes to a vote. Northern states vote in favor of it, 33-1. Southern states vote against it, 19-6. So overall, what is that vote? It's 39-20. The overall vote is 39-20 for the bank. Not surprisingly, the states that are in debt, the northern states, say, yeah, let's consolidate our debt. Not surprisingly, the states that have already paid off their debt are opposed to this thing, However, the quantity of votes goes in favor of having a national bank. And this leads to the very broad question that we're going to wrestle with now and into the future. How do we interpret this Constitution? We wrote it. We voted for it. We put a whole lot of things in it. Wasn't it enough? Some are going to say anything not in the Constitution, you can expand the Constitution to meet the needs of government. And when expanding, another word for that is elastic. It's what we call the elastic clause. Some people think you can stretch the Constitution to meet the needs of current government. Others are going to say if it's not written down, you can't do it. And that's going to be a strict interpretation of the Constitution. So we have the stage set for different opinions in government. Here's a verdict on the National Bank, just to close out that first challenge in George Washington's presidency. Washington agrees with Hamilton. Okay, Washington was not a member of a party. He would never say, I was a Federalist. But he agreed with Hamilton. He agreed that a national bank would unify the states. And he agreed that even though we wrote this document and we're really proud of it, we might have forgotten some things along the way. And that elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause, does give government the ability to add to it if necessary. So the national bank is created. It's overseen by the federal government. However, 80% of it, the lion's share, does come from private investors. So for the fears that it was going to be a large government institution, it is actually funded mostly by private investors. So this is one challenge. Early on, one challenge in Washington's presidency, the national bank. And we are going to continue to see the national bank have issues or be a part of the conversation into the future as well. Let's close it out on Alexander Hamilton, and this might be good to put on his block. What is his overall legacy? So first of all, his achievements enhance the value of the dollar, right? He put us on the same national currency. That's a good thing. He secured the government's credit. The idea that if we're borrowing from other countries, they're going to have an investment in our country that improves our credit. Attracted foreign capital and foreign investors. We are now on the world stage. We are interacting with other countries. That's important. And prosperity in the country does begin to flourish. So a lot of people would say Alexander Hamilton and his national bank are a good thing. However, here's some critiques. He was always seen an elitist. He was always a rich man. The national bank itself was seen as a project for rich people, or a kind of like a pet bank of the elites in the country, not connecting to the farmers, not connecting to the less wealthy. So he's going to never really connect with the commoners in the country, and that leads to accusations of being an elitist. This is about as much as we'll talk about Alexander Hamilton in this class. He has a very sensational end to his life, and that is captured in the music Hamilton, where he goes and duels Vice President Aaron Burr. Shots are fired. Were they thrown or not? We'll never know. Alexander Hamilton dies from a shot to the chest fired by Vice President Aaron Burr, which is the third Vice President of the United States. This is the unceremonious ending to Alexander Hamilton. But that's extra. Right now, this is Alexander Hamilton as a member of the cabinet. All right, next up on your notes, on your open notes, is Jay's Treaty. This is, again, one of the challenges faced by Washington. And the challenge is how we're being treated by England at this time. Not surprisingly, having beat them in a war, they're not exactly our BFFs. So here's some of the things here's some of the ways England is treating us in the present term, 1790 and onward. One, they're seizing U.S. ships on the open waters. Their strategy or their argument is that, hey, the sailors on these ships were born in a British colony. They are British. Service to an American nation is treason. So as we capture these ships, we are impressing these sailors into service on behalf of England. You can imagine we fought a war for that to not happen, so that's not going to go over well with us. We just don't have a navy that can actually enforce that yet. So seizing U.S. ships, that's a problem. They, in the Treaty of Paris of 1783, the British are supposed to vacate forts in the frontier. The land we gained as a country in that treaty was from what to what? What were the new land gained from what boundary to what boundary? From the Appalachians to the Mississippi River, okay? Even though we that was territory to us, and we had not, they weren't states right away. That's called the frontier. The British had forts on the frontier, and since we gained that land, they're supposed to leave. Well, they're slow rolling, and they're not leaving those forts on the frontier. So we're going to need to, we want them to leave the forts on the frontier. They've already agreed to this. We need them to leave. And then finally, another thing about the Treaty of Paris, 1783, they were going to repay for damaged and stolen crops, killed and stolen slaves as property, right? Anything damaged in the war, they're supposed to pay us for. They already agreed to that. They just haven't done it yet. So these are three issues we're having with Britain at this time. John Jay, he's a diplomat. He is sent to England to negotiate on behalf of all three of these issues. Well, in the end, Jay does not have a very successful trip to England. The British agree to one thing. They agree to leave the frontier, but that's it. So Jay's visit is seen as very unsuccessful, and the treaty that comes from it, Jay's treaty, is seen as very weak. Not a great step into international relations, not a great step into negotiating with a foreign power, and in a little way, kind of an embarrassment to first President George Washington because he's not able to flex on the world stage. He gets this pretty weak sauce treaty instead of really getting everything that he wants. Back home, the treaty is met with outrage, right? Jay comes back, here's the terms, here's what they agreed to. Not a lot of people are in favor of this weak treaty, but Washington, I decided to take something instead of nothing. I accept the treaty, and even though we didn't get everything we wanted, I accept the treaty, and this is the beginning of the British leaving our ships alone because of that. So that's Jay's treaty. I'm not going to elaborate too much more on that, but I do want you to keep in mind the sailors being captured on their ships and forced into service for England. That's going to remain an issue for quite some time, and we will talk about it again. All right, next up, we're in challenges, right? First challenges, and then we're going to talk about what? P word? Precedents. Not president, that's me, but precedents. So challenges. One more big challenge, and it is the Whiskey Rebellion. This is a domestic issue. Domestic means at home. Okay, so Jay's treaty, when I sent John Jay to negotiate overseas, that's international. But domestic means an issue at home. So here's the setup for the Whiskey Rebellion. We're going to see that the power of the presidency is tested when some frontiersmen in western Pennsylvania threaten to destroy the country just as it is beginning. So we see here's the setup. We see the national government is assuming states' debts. Well, how do you pay off debts, right? If the government is assuming debt, how does the government collect revenue? Taxes, yeah. How do you collect revenue? Taxes. Well, didn't we just fight a war against overtaxation? You're gonna have a lot of people not really impressed with the federal government levying these taxes. 1791, the government levies a tax on whiskey. Here's the language. It's a tax on distilled spirits, i.e. liquor, and the most common of which, the biggest at the time, was whiskey. So it's basically a tax on whiskey. Here's how this affected the average man. Many farmers use their excess rye and grain to distill it into whiskey and make a little money on the side, right? Their primary crop was things that you can eat. Breadbasket colonies, making wheat, selling wheat, right? Their primary source of revenue was this good, wheat. However, as with any crop, there's some extra, there's some leftovers, there's those that falls off the stalk. They use this excess rye to distill it into whiskey. Now, I'm not going to get too much farther into how to make whiskey, but it is with grain, right? So they use this excess rye and grain, they make whiskey, and they sell the whiskey on the side. It's their side crop. Not their major moneymaker, but a side crop. Well, the federal government, not receiving a tax on this side crop, now specifically taxes whiskey. So now you have farmers being taxed on their side crop. Okay, it's the federal government reaching into their pocketbook via taxes. Many farmers and frontiersmen, understandably, are angry about these taxes because why? What did we just fight? A war against unfair taxing. So who is this federal government to reach into my pocketbook after many of them veterans, after I just fought a war against unfair taxation? Well, this tax was levied 1791. None of this happens overnight. As with many things in life, it takes time. Summer of 1794, a revolt breaks out in western Pennsylvania. This is where armed frontiersmen, many of them Revolutionary War veterans, march against the federal government, and what they're doing is challenging this tax on whiskey. It starts with, very similar to a story we've already told, kidnapping, abusing, tarring, and feathering. Who do you think? Federal tax collectors. Yeah, a la the Sons of Liberty. Just like the Sons of Liberty did to British tax collectors, well, now you have frontiersmen assaulting American tax collectors. No love lost for the tax collectors, right? They're still nobody's favorite person. So you have tax collectors being attacked, tarred and feathered, not unlike the Revolution. In western Pennsylvania, there are a few gun battles with some local tax collectors, shootout, Wild West. A local militia stands up, a Pennsylvania militia, and a few people are injured and killed, and the whole countryside is up in arms. So you got western Pennsylvania as a hot spot in the country at this time. The whole Revolutionary War had just been fought about excessive taxes. The rebels remember that, and they felt like they were rising up again. It was perhaps their duty to do so, because didn't we just fight a war all about that? Well, Washington, myself, as the first president, I understood that this was a threat posed to the federal government, and this is an opportunity for the federal government to show its strength. Unlike a previous rebellion where the federal government didn't have the strength to put it down, what was that? Shays' Rebellion. Unlike Shays' Rebellion, where the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation did not give the federal government the ability to really address that rebellion, here's what happens this time. I'm determined to put down this rebellion, and I call together a militia. We didn't have a very large standing army at the time. I know you think we just fought a war and there's a large army. Many of those men went home, in fact, these frontiersmen among them. So I had to call together a militia. And governors from several different states, New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, send troops to be controlled by the federal government. So in total, I have 13,000 troops sent to support Washington, myself, and we march towards Pennsylvania. The rebels dispersed. As soon as word got out that George Washington was leading an army to put down this rebellion, the rebels dispersed. Two big reasons. One, genuine respect for George Washington. They said, ooh, the president himself, our leader in terms of military, is leading this rebellion. We don't have a chance. We better disperse. And then the other side of it is that the federal government demonstrated strength. 13,000 members of the militia was far outnumbering the few band of rebels in western Pennsylvania. So two big things there. Respect for Washington, we're going to disperse. And quite frankly, we don't have a chance anyway. We're going to disperse. So as soon as word got out that Washington himself was leading the rebellion, or leading the militia to put down the rebellion, it was all but over. It was over at that time. Demonstrated the strength of the federal government, especially in light of previous failures to put down a rebellion, Shays' Rebellion. This is a pretty cool little side extra. Only time in the history of our country that a president has led troops in battle. The president's the commander-in-chief. He's responsible for the military. But the only time in history that the president himself has led troops in battle is when George Washington marched against the Whiskey Rebellion in this time. It sets the example of federal authority and follow through. The president can enforce federal law and will enforce federal law. You cannot boss around this government, even though we're still young, perhaps even in our infancy, you cannot boss around this government. So there you have it, three big ones. Challenges debt, thus the National Bank. Challenge the British problem, thus Jay's Treaty and what he negotiated for. Challenge taxation. Taxes are necessary to raise money. That's why we have the whiskey tax, but led to the Whiskey Rebellion. And in a way, this taxation issue led to the federal government being able to demonstrate its strength. So those are challenges. Those are challenges faced by George Washington. Let's talk now about precedents. What is a precedent? Now, president, that's me. What is a precedent? Looking for a definition from the room here.
Something you do while you're in office.
Something you do while you're in office. Yeah, there's a lot of somethings I do. There's another key attribute that would make it a precedent.
Something that's never been done before.
Perfect. Something that's never been done before. Meaning that I am the first person to do it in office. Actions that were taken that are then followed by future presidents. So this is on your page. Precedents is on your page. And on this page right here, I'm going to list Washington's precedents. So you might have to flip between the two pages again. I believe in you. Yeah, virtually everything I did was a precedent. I am the first president. So therefore, anything I did in office becomes a precedent. Should I accept a dinner invitation from a foreign dignity? Yes or no becomes a precedent. Should the president go to funerals? Yeah, is that something that a president does? Yes or no, that sets a precedent. Everything Washington did takes on a significance because it is the first time that a president is doing it. Remember, we're trying to figure out what the chief executive is. George Washington was determined to be the best man to be the first. So the world is watching. The nation and the world is watching. Anything George Washington does is going to take on extra significance because he's the first to do it. So some of the precedents we're going to talk about, well, we'll talk about them in order here. Take on the very modest title of Mr. President. There's big debate about what to call the president. John Adams, this is even before the election, before John Adams was vice president, John Adams proposed a very regal title. John Adams thought that the position should hold something close to a kingship, and he said that the president should be called His Majesty the President, right? Didn't we fight a war to get away from some majesties? So not a lot of people were in favor of that super regal title. Washington initially agrees to be called His Excellency, which is very similar to what he was called as commander of the Continental Army. His Excellency implies a step below regal, but still a very invested authority, okay? His Excellency. But eventually, knowing that the country is watching, George Washington settles on the very modest title of Mr. President, which to this day is how the president is referred to. By his cabinet, by his chief of staff, by the military, any military members he's talking to this day, President Joe Biden will be referred to as Mr. President because George Washington decided on this very regal title. Very simple title. Could have gone regal, but went very simple. So that is why I introduced myself as Mr. President. You can call me Mr. President. Another precedent set formed a cabinet of close advisors. Now, you all probably have cabinets in your home. Where do you tend to have cabinets? What's that? In what room in your home? The kitchen, right? We very often think of kitchen cabinets. So was George Washington's cabinet filled with plates and cups and saucers? No, we're not talking about physical cabinets like you would open the door, shut the door, have in your kitchen. Cabinet refers to his collection of advisors. And now I want to pivot back to your opening activity where I asked you if you were to have someone in your life as a close advisor, someone to give you advice, who would it be? That is someone you would put in your cabinet. If you were to create Eric's cabinet of close advisors, I only asked you for one, but you would probably collect between 3 to 5 close advisors. And Eric, you didn't share yours. Who did you put in your cabinet?
Same thing Delano put.
Same thing Delano put.
Nobody.
Nobody. Oh, this guy. We can move over to Jackie. Jackie, you put your sister, right? Sister is your mentor, and you put her there because you have a close relationship. She's kind of a moral compass for you, and she's a touch older than you. Might you also put someone, I know you are a cheerleader, someone from cheerleading? Might you also, let's say you get a job later in life, maybe you would put someone from your job, maybe your work advisor, and someone from your personal faith background, maybe a spiritual advisor. This could make up your cabinet. Multiple advisors giving you advice in their area of expertise, making you well-rounded. Use Jackie for this future to all of you. You would most likely not just have one advisor in your life. You don't have just one advisor in your life. You have many advisors in your life. And put together, those advisors make you well-rounded. This is exactly what George Washington did with his cabinet. He deliberately sought the advice of people who were experts in specific fields, and especially in fields that he was not an expert in. So this is George Washington's initial cabinet. He had General Henry Knox, who was a Revolutionary War general for him, become Secretary of War. So even though George Washington was commander of the Continental Army, I would say he knows the military. He has a Secretary of War, someone to advise him in all things military. Next, we have Alexander Hamilton, already mentioned, as Secretary of Treasury, responsible for all things related to the economy. And of course, he proposes big things like the National Bank. Third in line, we went Knox, Hamilton, Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is Secretary of State. When we say this is a position that still exists to this day, state means dealing with other nations. So he represents our nation to all the other nations. Thomas Jefferson dealing with all things foreign diplomacy. And then on the far right-hand side, that's Edmund Randolph, and he's Attorney General, dealing with all things related to the law. This is Washington's initial cabinet of advisors, the people he trusted to help him create policy, execute policy, and bottom line, just someone to give him advice. It's a very humble acknowledgement that I don't know everything. Coming from the monarchies and the kings of Europe, how many advisors do you think a king had that he would listen to? Largely none, right? King was all-knowing, all-powerful, I speak, you do. A king says, I can rule the country by myself. George Washington, in a precedent-setting move, brings on advisors to say, I don't know everything, I need help. This is George Washington's cabinet. The president still has a cabinet to this day, but it has grown considerably. You want to take a guess as to how many cabinet members are in Joe Biden's cabinet? I got to vote for 22, 27, 56. What do we got over here? Someone said something. He's got to do what? Not going there. In Joe Biden's cabinet, this is the current president's cabinet, there are 16 advisors. 16 advisors in the cabinet, and not every, did I say that right? Count those for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 times 3, 27. Excuse me, 27. I don't know why I said 16. 27 advisors in Joe's cabinet. So the cabinet has grown considerably. We still see the main three. Top left here, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, which was the Secretary of War, and Attorney General. Okay, that's the big four, the original four. But everything since has grown. House and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, etc. The cabinet has swelled. So a cabinet meeting is no longer just 5 dudes shooting the breeze, getting advice on certain areas. It is now a very large meeting of people, and that is the and it is something that it's a precedent that George Washington set. Okay, it's 22. Yeah, my bad. I was unprepared to spit that off the top of my head. I don't know why. Yeah, there you go. Point is, it's grown a lot. It's grown a lot, right? And here's an important piece about the function of the cabinet has remained largely the same. These are some of the brightest minds in America. I don't care what you think about politics either side or parties either side. These are some of the brightest minds in America. They are brought together. They give the president advice. They should not be yes men. What's a yes man? Someone that's going to agree with the president no matter what. Yeah, yes, sir. Oh, great idea, sir. Absolutely. These people are meant to, their area of expertise should challenge the president. They should inform him, and if he comes up with an idea that is not good inside of their area of expertise, they should challenge him. So they should not be yes men. Sometimes they're political opponents. In fact, George Washington's cabinet, Hamilton and Jefferson were on opposite sides. We already looked at them as opponents, a Federalist and a Democratic Republican. So sometimes there is the bipartisan perspective, they're political opponents. The cabinet should not be something that's all for the Republicans or all for the Democrats. It should be the people who are going to give the president the best advice in their area of expertise. Sometimes, and it's a brilliant move by George Washington to bring in people who are going to give him good advice. And it was a humble move by George Washington, him saying, I don't know everything, so therefore I'm going to bring my cabinet, or I'm going to have a cabinet who's going to help me make decisions for the country. So did the opening activity kind of help you realize that you need advisors in your life as well? And it relates to one of George Washington's precedents. A couple more here. Precedent is that he delivers the State of the Union address. How many of you have ever watched the State of the Union address? What is the State of the Union address?
This one there. And then when the president like talks and discloses what's going on.
When the president talks and tells how we're doing in the country, what is the state of our union, right? How we doing? Kind of the how we doing speech is how I like to put it. When does the president give the State of the Union address? It's supposed to be in either January or February. That's how it's written in the Constitution. The Biden administration delivered theirs on March 1st this year. I don't know why they waited till March 1st, but sometimes, the president can stretch that a little bit. But generally speaking, the State of the Union will come in January or February based off of the national situation. Originally, it was simply a written report delivered to Congress. These days, it has become a made-for-television affair where all the cameras are trained on the president. It's a joint session of Congress. Representatives and the Senate come together in the same room, and the president is addressing them. Sometimes, how many of y'all have ever watched it before?
Watch what?
The State of the Union address. Once a year, it only comes on once a year. How does the applause tend to go at the State of the Union address? Eric says every time he says something, someone's clapping. Yeah, there's a lot of clap points, but what's another thing you might notice about the applause? There's a few points where everybody claps. All right, there's a few points where it's kind of a unity thing.
Oh, but like it depends on who's.
Sometimes only half the room claps. Yeah, sometimes if the president is of whatever party, he says something that his party's going to clap for, and it almost becomes a show for the other party to purposefully not clap. So it has become a political spectacle as the president delivers the State of the Union. Next here, this is very foundational. George Washington only served 2 terms. This is significant because it was not stated how many terms the president can serve. Today, you know it to be law, and that is because of the 22nd Amendment. Okay, this is the future 22nd Amendment limiting the president to only 2 terms. But at the time, many people believed George Washington could and should be president for the rest of his life. He's the best first president we could have ever imagined. Let's just let him keep being the president. But George Washington, at the end of his second 4-year term, purposefully stepped down, setting a precedent that would be followed by all other presidents until there's one president who has served a 3rd term. Anybody know? FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yep. He's elected to a 3rd. He's elected to a 4th. He dies at the beginning of his 4th, but he is elected to 4 terms. Now, the people kept electing him. This is Roosevelt I'm speaking of. The people kept electing him, so you can't say that he was grabbing power. But many people will say 2 terms is enough. And in fact, in 1953, 22nd Amendment is passed, and today it's a law. Today, a president will not run for a 3rd term because they cannot run for a 3rd term. So, major precedent setting by George Washington, serving only 2 terms. Probably the most significant shaping of our republic that George Washington brings into the present day was stepping down after only 2 terms. And in stepping down after only 2 terms, he delivers a farewell address. And in his farewell address, he outlines things he wishes for the country going forward. And we're going to talk about his farewell address right here in a second, in a second. Here's a quote from it: "Guard against the impostures of pretend patriotism." He's warning that there are going to be some people out there waving the flag like they're patriots, but it's pretend patriotism. So that's one of the really important statements that comes out of his farewell address. Here is Washington's farewell address, and that is on your page, the main points of his farewell address. 1, he calls for unity, right? He is stepping down. He doesn't know who will be elected next. He doesn't know if the unity that currently exists in the country will last. He calls for unity. He says we're better together than apart, paraphrasing. He says we're better together than we are divided. So he asks for unity. He advocates for neutrality. Long story short, Britain and France were at war at this time, and he said instead of getting involved on one side or the other, we're going to say neutral. Neutral means you're not for or against either of them. We're going to keep trading with Britain. We're going to keep trading with France. We're not going to support either of them militarily. We are too young, too broke, and too weak militarily as a country to get involved on either side. His phrasing is to avoid foreign entanglements, but what he means by that is neutrality. Stay neutral. Don't get involved in foreign wars. This is a precedent that will be abided by for a long time, saying that the issues of Europe belong to Europe. Let's focus on home. I want you to keep this in mind as we walk ourselves towards World War I and then World War II, where we know we got involved in European wars. So it remains a precedent for a long time until we just can't ignore European conflicts when they are on the world stage. He speaks of good governance based on religion and morality. We know Washington to have been a man of faith. We looked at the painting where he was praying at Valley Forge, and even if it didn't happen exactly like that painting, he wrote in his journals often of prayer and scripture and the divine and a creator, a creator God. So we know that George Washington was a man of faith, and he believed that governance should be based on religion and morality. And then finally, super importantly, he warns against political parties, or what he calls factions. Faction is like a divide. He wouldn't have known the future of the Republican and the Democrat Party, because those are actually modern constructs. But he did realize that something that could threaten the Republic was a divide in the people along party lines. So looking at the list here, did we abide by all of George Washington's farewell address statements? Yeah, it's the political party one for me that jumps out the most as what we almost immediately ignored, because as we talk about John Adams tomorrow, the election of 1896, we are going to see that it is going to pit party versus party. So even George Washington himself and his plea in his farewell address was not enough for his countrymen to avoid political parties. So not everything George Washington did was abided by. Just because he was the first president and set many precedents, there are still rules that got broken, and the political party one is one of them that was broken pretty quickly. I'm going to skip past Washington in 60 seconds. We might catch that at the end of the class. It's a really great video series put out by PBS, Public Broadcasting Services. It's all presidents in 60 seconds. So we'll probably catch that at the end of the class here and summarize everything I said. I want to finish out like this as I stand before you as George Washington. This is a bust of George Washington, a facial depiction, a sculpture.
I thought bust was like
This is a bust of George Washington. A bust is someone's shoulders and up, like for real. A bust, being a sculpture, is someone's shoulders and up. So in the Hall of Fame, football, baseball, whatever, they have their bust, which is their face, head, and shoulders. This is a bust. This is a bust of George Washington. This is at Mount Vernon, Virginia, which is George Washington's home. And this is sculpted in 1785 by Jean-Antoine Houdon. What's significant about this bust is that years later, George Washington's granddaughter said that this is the best representation of George Washington's face that I've ever seen. I feel like that his granddaughter, who grew up with him, has the ability to make that statement and make it accurately. If this is the most accurate rendition of George Washington's face that his granddaughter has ever seen, I'm going to trust that. What's significant about that is this day and age, we don't have photography. We rely on famous pictures like this, and we wonder if it's accurate. I think that this bust is life-giving to show what George Washington might have actually looked like. If it's good enough for his granddaughter, I'm going to accept that as truth as well. And I'll zoom in on it. I think that picture's close, but there's enough of a, cartoon aspect to it that it just doesn't come to life quite like this bust does. So I see the bridge of his nose. I see his cheeks. I see his forehead. It's just very distinguished features. And like I said, if that's good enough for his granddaughter to be seen as accurate, I'm going to accept that as accurate as well. Now, something cool in the modern day with digital imaging and the ability to create on a computer. A lot of people have taken renderings like this and tried to apply it to the modern. So I got a couple of funsies here that show what George Washington might have looked like with true CGI creation and all that. So what we know on the left-hand side, what we know of the painting, the portrait, right? And then on the right-hand side, it is using that bust image I just showed you. That is maybe, just maybe, what modern George Washington could have looked like. You know, in his presidential portrait, if it was taken in the 2020s, maybe that's what George Washington would look like. And I like staring at pictures like that and thinking, yeah, that might be the father of our country. That might be what he looks like today. Hang with me. Don't close out on me. This is one more statue, and this resides in the Virginia State Capitol. And the face of it is the same bust that I just showed you. Okay, so the face is accurate, but then it gives a body to it as well. And when viewed in the 1820s, Marquis de Lafayette makes a tour through the country in the 1820s. And this is when a lot of cities get named Lafayette or Fayetteville when he visits them. Marquis de Lafayette viewed this statue, and he said, that is the man himself. So again, Marquis de Lafayette, someone who spent a lot of time with him. If Marquis de Lafayette says that's the man himself, I'm going to say that's good enough for me as well. So I like looking at that and thinking that maybe, just maybe, that's how George Washington stood, and that is his posture. And if Marquis de Lafayette felt like that's what the man looked like, that's what I think the man looks like as well. And then finally, maybe more on the stately side or the elderly side, I think this picture is interesting as well. Other artists have imagined it from a military perspective. Commander-in-Chief George Washington, 4-star General George Washington with a more modern haircut. And if he was a Marine, maybe that's what he would look like as well. That face comes from the bust I showed you, the haircut and the uniform a little bit more modern. So I'm going to close this out like this. I'm going to let us watch a scene from Hamilton. And this scene from Hamilton is a song called One Last Time. And in this song, we see Hamilton. Hamilton largely wrote most of Washington's farewell address. George Washington's words, George Washington's sentiments, but his skill as a writer, Alexander Hamilton, largely wrote most of George Washington's farewell address. And what we see in the musical here, I'm going to show you the whole scene, is a rendering of what it might have been like to be in that room in that moment. It is set to music, it is catchy, but some of the language is exactly from George Washington's farewell address, and all of the sentiments, I would say, are from George Washington's farewell address. So even though some of the musical is historically iffy, I say, as your teacher, I say that this scene is pretty close to accurate, so I want to show it to you. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy this 5-minute song one last time. I'm going to put the words on the screen because I think that helps you catch all the lines sometimes. And here we go.
Mr. President, you asked me to sing. I know you're busy. You need to. So, I want to give you a word of warning. Sir, I don't know what you've heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it. Thomas Jefferson resigned.
What?
I need a favor. Whatever you say, sir. Jefferson will pay for his behavior. Lord, well, use the press. I'll write a little soon, and you'll see what I can do to him. I need you to grab the dress. Resign, you can finally speak your mind. No. I'm stepping down so you can run for president. The one's defeating you, sir. I'm stepping down. I'm not running for president. Sorry, what?
Sorry, what?
One last time. Relax. One last time. Let's take a break tonight and then teach you how to say goodbye. Let's say goodbye. You and I want to talk about neutrality. Britain and France on the verge of war. Is this the best? I want you all against partisan fighting. Pick up a pencil. start fighting. I wanna talk about what I have learned, the hard-won wisdom I have earned. As far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You can continue to serve. No, one last time. The people here one last time. And if we get this right, we're gonna teach them how to say goodbye. You and I. People say you're weak, they will see we're strong. So I'll use it to move them along. Why do you have to say goodbye? If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. Lives me when I'm gone.
Actual language.
I'm so sick under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. We'll be safe in the nation made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade, and hope this nation made. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I should also carry with me them. My country will do them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to service with an upright zeal, faults and incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as I myself must soon be to the mansions of the rest. I anticipate with an expectation of retreat, in which I promise myself to realize the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens. And 9 years of good laws of the free government is a favorite object of and happy rewards I trust from mutual aid. George Washington's going Say goodbye one last
Stand and applaud sometimes. So George Washington willingly leaves office after 2 terms. Did not have to, chose to. He goes home to Mount Vernon, as you heard him say, some of the language there. He just wanted to go home and rest. He spent a lifetime in service to his country, starting as far back as in the French and Indian War, serving his country at the time, and in service to the American nation from 1775 onward. He was tired. I would say he deserved to go home. He does go home to Mount Vernon, where he lives for about 2.5 more years. He only gets that amount of rest at the end of a lifetime of service. And my final thought, I would say there's power in a good goodbye, right? We're going to teach them how to say goodbye. We're going to show the country how to move on, to be safe in this land that we've made. A lot of those words are pretty powerful, and pretty powerful depiction on the screen there of just maybe what it was like to be in the room as they authored that together. So George Washington's farewell address is that final really powerful precedent that he set. So this is the end of day one of our presidency. So, hey guys, it's me, it's Mr. Swanson. Did you know? Let's briefly talk about kind of test trends, okay? And I'll say some of these don't necessarily fit this class, right? I've built these trends for all three of my classes. So just hear this. If this is you, take it to heart. If you're cruising, like you landed with the 100, a couple of y'all landed with the 100s, great, keep it up. So first of all, not bad overall, for real. If you landed a little less than what you wanted as a score, okay, it's test one, lean in. Now we know what tests look like. Y'all have very high personal standard of excellence. Some of y'all were disappointed about an 83 or 78. Whatever. That's great, right? I'm glad you're disappointed about an 83. 83, we're on the right track. Let's go ahead and step into the next level just like you want to. It's different from last year. I agree, right? World history for last year. Now, y'all have a rep of Illuminate already under your belt, but it was your first Illuminate test of the semester. So, bam! Wake up. This is what Illuminate tests look like. Some of y'all crushed it. Some of y'all easing into it. Big key here. If you don't recognize that vocab term in the first place, you can't even begin to detox the rest of the question. That's where vocab is the foundation. Now, very few questions are going to be, who was Baron von Steuben, trained at Valley Forge? That was one of the questions. Okay, so every now and then, knowing vocab pays off instantly. It's like a level 1 question. But more often than not, the question is going to have vocab in it that you got to recognize and then put to the multiple choice option. So vocab is the foundation. You can't go really anywhere else without vocab, and that's why we're going to start drilling vocab. I think we did a good job, but we're going to continue to drill vocab because that is the foundation. Some of y'all, looking at some of your test questions, you chose the distractor. Maybe it was just appetizing enough that you felt like it was the right answer, but there's that one key word in there, and I can't give you an example off the top of my head, but sometimes questions are written with a distractor. And many times y'all chose the almost right answer, but there was a distractor phrase in there, and you got suckered in by that. So that's that test taking still, right? We're going to make sure we understand the key word, X out the whole answer when it's wrong. Sometimes, I don't know if this was anyone in the room in particular or not, but sometimes I can look at the Illuminate screen as you're taking the test, and I'll see a student that is, 31 out of 35 correct. And then I'll look at that student a few minutes later, and it's 28 out of 35 correct. What has that student just done? Yeah, probably going through the test and second guessed themselves on a couple questions, and in fact made some of those questions wrong. I agree that you should look back through your test, but if you were, A or C, I'm not sure, and you went with your gut, that kind of question, leave it. If you skipped a question and you're going back through the test and you realize it's blank, by all means, answer that question. But if you were kind of 50-50 on a question and you went with your gut for a reason, right? It's going to take some real strong, like, ooh, wow, I didn't mean to click D, I meant to click C. Change that type of a question. But if it was a 50-50 and you went with your gut, stick with your gut. Oftentimes you guys go the wrong direction as you start changing questions. Some of y'all, I don't think this room in particular, but some of y'all like have a real test anxiety. You're fretting. Relax, take a breath, slow down. Right? Again, I think this room did pretty well on the test, but if that trend applies to you, take that to heart. Then there is a direct correlation between those who did good homework and did good on the test. Those who did poor homework, very few words, missing blanks filled in, didn't turn in homework, did poor homework, you kind of did poor on the test. Very rarely does a person with a string of zeros whip out a 93 and be like, why do I have to do homework? I passed the test. Very rarely does that happen. Don't rely on that. Do good homework, be prepared for good tests, okay? So if that's you, if you're hanging out with a string of zeros, I'm not talking to you. And then finally, I did see some copy or study guide, filling in like in the moment of. That's not studying, guys. Okay, cramming ain't it. Study guide scavenger hunt is designed to force you into the study guide the night before, not the 5 minutes before. Okay, so I'm not saying anything about copying. Partner studying is fine with me, but in the 5 minutes before class, that ain't it. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I want to recognize the excellence of 3 100s in the room. I'm not sure I've had that happen yet, so if you will come to the front of the room, please. Jackson and Ray and Madison all made a 100. In fact, they all made a 105 because they took me up on the bonus points as well. And I do very often see that students who are already set up to make a 100 are the ones who cash in on the bonus points as well. If you made an 88, what would 5 bonus points have done to you? 92, 78, 82, right? So the bonus point opportunity was there. You did it or you didn't. Good for you. Or I'm on my good next time. Okay. No love lost, right? You didn't do the bonus point challenge. That's fine with me. You didn't hurt my heart, but you cost yourself 5 bonus points that you could have had. So that bonus point opportunity will be there in the future as well. All right. I will take go ahead and slide your parchment papers to Trinity and to Landon. I'll take those. And I hope you learned something about George Washington today, because he came to class so that you would learn about him. I'll take it. Thank you. Hey, I loved your exit tickets. Some of you that.
Good morning, Residers. It is Monday of the 4th week of school. Can you believe that we are already beginning week 4? Next week will be 1/4 of the way through this semester, 25% of the way through. We'll be pulling and beginning our grade level challenges to see how those GPAs are doing at this point. So exciting times. Not to mention, we like to look and see how some extracurriculars are doing as well. So we got a few days, a week and a half to be able to step it up, make sure. I know we've got a lot of unit assessments and stuff going on right now.